Krishna, very dear devotees, warm welcome back to Sri Vrindavan Dham, rural Vrindavan, in the sense that we're basing a lot of our classes this last year on the forest of Vrindavan. It's sure and certain that Krishna prefers the rural setting of Vrindavan to the big cities, the pastoral scene, is the playground of God, and the dust of Vrindavan, Brajarenu. Actually, Krishna confirms that in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:24-24, the verse we were quoting some months ago. Nana puro jana pada nagramyana griya vayam vanuk ashastata nityam vanashaila nivashina. Beautiful Sanskrit. My dear Father, our home is not in the cities or towns or villages. Being forest dwellers, we always live in the forest and on the hills. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki. Nama Om Vishnupadaya, Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pacharine, Nivishesha Shunyavadi, Pashtata Deshatarane. All glories to Prabhupada. So, I would like to begin today by setting the scene, as they say, with two very beautiful verses by Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati from his Vrindavan Mahimamrita, Sataka 6, meaning chapter 6. And I quote, In the abode of Vrindavan, please worship Sri Sri Radha and Krishna, whose jokes and laughter are as splendid as millions of rising moons, the movements of whose eyebrows create millions of wonderful transcendental kamadevas, and whose words are like millions of flowing streams of the cooling sweetness of transcendental bliss. All glories to the fair and dark divine couple, who somewhere in Vrindavan play dice, somewhere playfully hide from each other, somewhere steal each other's property, somewhere embrace imitating trees and vines, somewhere ride together on a swing, somewhere speak wonderful riddles, somewhere imitate the movements of birds, deer, and other forest creatures, and somewhere amuse themselves with jugglery and special magic tricks. Magic tricks. So, taking the hint from Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati, today I would like to take you could say, on a transcendental, magical mystery tour of Sri Vrindavan Dham to a most amazing forest. It's called Anjana-Vana. Anjana-Vana. Now this Anjana-Vana is actually one of the sub-forests of Vrindavan, where a very famous and nectarian pastime took place 5,000 years ago. Of course, the pastimes are eternal, but and remember that there are 12 main forests in Vrindavan and 132 sub-forests. And then you have sub-sub-forests and sub-sub-sub-forests ad infinitum. But this Anjana-Vana, it's so important, it's so significant, actually, that our beloved Narayan Bhatta Goswami, we'll be quoting him again, profusely describes it in his famous Brajabhakti Vilas. In fact, he goes so far as to give a pranam mantra for Anjana-Vana. And we found that in chapter 11, verse 17. He says, Deva Gandharva Lokanam Ramyavai Hararupine Vaichittumur Taye Tubhyam Anjanapura Vanavaya. Very beautiful. O forest named Anjana-Vana, obeisances to you, who is the delightful sporting place of Devatas and Gandharvas, and who is the personification of variegated joys. And then Narayan Bhatta Goswami continues Quote, one should offer 4 obeisances while chanting that mantra. He who does so obtains all desires and remains ever youthful. That's interesting. Remains ever youthful. How do you remain ever youthful in a world of birth and death? You can't. But if you chant these mantras and you practice Krishna consciousness, especially if you chant the Maha Mantra, you'll go back home, back to Godhead, where there's no birth, disease, old age, and death. Then in order to get the full benefit of visiting this particular forest, Anjana-Van, he writes, perform 3 pranayamas while reciting the following mantra as you enter into Anjana-Vana. Remember all this. Bhadra Shukla Charutyam Tu Gatos Jana Puravanam Vanita Shukalabhaya Vaitritam Shokyam Apnuyat. He writes, on the 4th day of the bright fortnight in the month of Bhadra, a person having gone to Anjana-Vana attains the happiness of getting a spouse and variegated happiness. Hare Krishna. Now, as we've mentioned a number of times, there is a presiding deity in each and every forest in Vrindavan, all those hundreds of forests. In each forest there's a presiding deity. And in the future, Krishna willing, when we visit these various forests in our parikramas, we should know and we should remember who is the presiding deity of each and every one of these forests. We should research that and find out. Why? Well, just like when you visit someone's home or house, you should know or you should be aware of who's the owner of the house. It's common sense. And visiting Vrindavan's forest, it's more than common sense to know the presiding deity of any forest, because without the blessings of these presiding deities, we'll neither see or hear the actual nature of those transcendental forests. So Narayan Bhatta Goswami reveals who is the presiding deity of Anjana-Vana. Yes. Again in Braja Bhakti Vilas, he writes, Pundarikaksho Anjana Prati Vana Dipo Devaha. He writes, the presiding deity of Anjana-Van is Lord Pundarikaksha. Then, out of his endless compassion, he gives us a prana mantra for the presiding deity of Anjana-Vana. This is a day of prana mantras, I guess you could say. And he gives it with the bij mantras. Special mantras have the bijas, which the bij is like the essence of the mantra. It has to be there in order to get the full benefit of the mantra. Like when we chant Gayatri, Om Bhura Bhuvaha, the Om is there first, it's the bij. So this is the prana mantra for the presiding deity of Anjana-Vana with the bijas. Om Shom, Shom, interesting bij. Om Shom Anjana Prativana Dipa Taye Pundarikakshaya Shvaha. Om Shom, I surrender myself unto Lord Pundarikaksha, the presiding deity of Anjana-Van. Wow. Now finally, bear with me, he reveals that in this mystic Van, in this mystic forest, we're going to be telling some amazing pastimes. There's a mysterious lake, a kunda, where Srimati Radharani and her girlfriends secretly come to bathe from time to time. You know, we know that Radharani bathes in Radhakund, especially at 12 noon, but there's many transcendental reservoirs of divine water throughout Vrindavan. And the inhabitants, they bathe in all these lakes and streams and so forth. So this is one of her favorite places as well. And it's called Kishori Kunda. Now, of course, there's a number of Kishori Kunds around Vrindavan, but this is one of the more prominent ones. And to properly honor Kishori Kunda in this particular forest, Narayan Bhatta Goswami has composed a prana mantra as well. Remember, prana mantras, they give us the essence, the mood, the bhav of this particular person or place. So for this lake, he writes as follows: Kishori Snan Ramyaya Pitta Rakta Jalap Bluta Tirtharaja Namastubhyam Krishna Krida Vidayine. Obeisances to you, O King of all Tirthas. Obeisances to you, who are a delightful place for bathing of Kishori, Radha. Obeisances to you, who is filled with waters of brilliant reddish and yellow colors. Obeisances to you, who arranges various sports for Krishna. Hare Krishna. Now, after revealing this mantra, he says, while performing Ajman, dip 13 times into Kishori Kund while chanting the following mantra. Yashodananda Krishnaya Priyayai Satatam Nama Kishora Rupine Tubhyam Balavayai Namostate. Obeisances to Krishna, the pleasure giver of Yashoda. Constant obeisances to his Priya, Radhika. Obeisances to you, O Krishna, having a Kishora Rupa. Obeisances to Balava, Radhika. That's Bhaja Bhakti Vilas 11:18. So we've set the scene. So now, in Anjana-Van, there's a village called Anjanoka. Anjanoka, the village of Indulekha-Saki. Indulekha-Saki. Anjanoka is where she resides. Srimati Radharani has, as you know, 8 very close maidservants who are her age or a little older. They're called Sakis. Those of you from Mayapur, you'll know better than me. Every morning you go to Mangalartik and there's Radha Madhava, and there's the 8 Astasakis on the altar. Lalita, Vishaka, Champaklata, Tungavidya, Chitra, Indulekha, Rangadevi, and Sudevi. Now these 8 Astasakis display, you could say, the topmost love for Radha and Krishna, but they're especially inclined towards Srimati Radharani. And they always prefer to serve under her and please her in every way possible. For example, I was reading, whenever the divine couple have a lover's quarrel, a transcendental lover's quarrel, these 8 maidservants of Radharani, they always take her side in the quarrel, always, without exception. So Indulekha is described as the 6th Astasaki, and I found her prana mantra. This is something quite amazing. I found her prana mantra in the Sada Namrita Chandrika. It's a rather obscure shastra, but it's there, it's authorized. Shada Namrita Chandrika, in the 2nd chapter, 23rd verse. And it's quite a elaborate Sanskrit shloka, and I'm not at all expert in Sanskrit, so I'll just read the very beautiful translation of her prana mantra. O Shri Radhika, I glorify your friend Indulekha Saki, who regularly celebrates a festival of dance, whose complexion is brighter than haritala, whose clothes are of the complexion of the reddish pomegranate flower, and who wins over the brilliance of the rays of the moon by her effulgence. Now, Indulekha is 3 days younger than Srimati Radharani. She has a tan complexion, and she wears clothes the color of a pomegranate flower, as we heard in her prana mantra, which is bright red in color. She has a very fiery temperament and is contrary by nature. And Shastra lists some of her amazing skills, of which we'll mention a few. She's learned in the science and mantras of Naga Shastra. You can guess what that means. It describes different methods for controlling snakes. She's also learned in Samudraka Shastra, which describes the science of palmistry. Reading the lines in someone's hand. It's palmistry. Like astrology, this is palmistry. So when I read that, I thought, that's unusual. Then I remembered that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, he was also expert in palmistry. I read in the Harmonist one time that sometimes his disciples would approach him and they put their hands out. Guru Maharaj, can you read my palm? So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati would take their palms, look at them very carefully, then he would say to each person, all bad, just chant Hare Krishna. He'd read the palm and he'd say, all bad, just chant Hare Krishna. All right, well. Anyway, Indulekha is also expert at stringing different types of necklaces and garlands. She's expert at decorating teeth with red substances. She's expert in the science of gems. And she's also very expert at weaving cloth. And she has a very intimate and service which she cherishes probably the most of all her services. And that's carrying messages back and forth to the divine couple. And as such, the acharyas say, quote, she's fully aware of the confidential secrets of Radha and Krishna. Now, her closest friends are Tungabhadra and Palindika. And together the three of them provide ornaments and exquisite garments for Srimati Radharani. And that's something really interesting. All three of them stand guard together over the divine couple's treasury. The three of them together, they stand guard over the divine couple's treasury. Now, like the other Sakis, Indulekha has service outside her own village of Anjanoka in the forest of Anjana-Van, which, by the way, is just next to Varshana, her village. Actually, Radharani's home is Varshana. It's a big hill. And the Asasakis, they all have their homes, their 8 homes around Varshana. So, of course, the Sakis move all over Vrindavan and have various pastimes. So another one of the prominent places of Indulekha's pastimes are at Radhakund. At Radhakund, each of the eight Astasakis have kunjas, which means small forest groves surrounding Radhakund. Now, I found in Govinda Lilamrita, chapter 7, verses 81 to 84, a very beautiful, detailed description of Indulekha's kunja, which I'd like to recite. Quote, in the Agni Kona, southeast direction of Radhakund, is a kunja named Purnendu, which means full moon, Purnendu, which bestows happiness upon Indulekha, Govinda Lilamrita says. The exteriors of this kunj are decorated with spatika mani, which means very clear crystals, and chandrakanta mani, which means natural moonstones. And Govinda Lilamrita continues, all the trees, creepers, bumblebees, and birds around this kunj are pristine white in color. And the birds are so indistinguishable from each other that only by hearing them can one make out the differences between them. They all look the same. Everything's the same color there, like white. And the only way you can distinguish between the individual birds is when they sing. They have a different warble, a different sing-song. So on full moon nights, Radha and Krishna often go there wearing pure white clothes. Everything's white, and they have their loving pastimes together in that kunja, and they're Induleka. She serves them. Now, back to Induleka's village of Anjanoka, in the forest of Anjana-Van. It's very, very interesting how this village became known as Anjanoka. And the description is given in Bhakti Ratnakara by Srila Narahari Chakravarti Thakur. How one time Radharani was being dressed in beautiful blue clothes by her very close girlfriends, the Sakis. So why blue? Because Radharani more often than not favors blue saris or blue clothes, blue cholis, because in this way she feels as if she is in Krishna's constant embrace, the Shastras say. She feels that she's in Krishna's constant embrace, because Krishna's bluish black like a monsoon cloud. She also likes to be decorated with blue sapphire jewelry and blue lotus garlands, obviously. And this particular occasion, as her girlfriends were dressing her, they dressed her in the cloth, and then they put, it's mentioned, they put cool sandalwood paste on her limbs, and they lightly sprayed her hair with the scent of a guru, oud. And towards the end of the dressing, they put a dot of musk on her chin. You sometimes see that our pujaris in ISKCON, when they dress Radha and Krishna, they put it's either painted or they put a dot there of musk. And they were just about to apply black ointment, Kajal, to her eyelids. Ladies use this ointment like mascara, I guess you could say, to enhance their beauty as well as to protect their eyes. So the gopis were just about to apply this kajal on Radharani's eyes when all of a sudden everyone heard the sound of Krishna's flute floating through the air of Vrindavan. You've seen pictures or paintings sometimes, right? Krishna's playing his flute and the artist draws these waves as it's going outward to the forest. And we all know what effect Krishna's flute has on the gopis, because it's imbued with Krishna's love for the gopis. His way of calling them, actually. And with that flute, he controls them. And for this reason, the gopis, they sometimes consider the flute to be their enemy because they can't resist it. Krishna controls them. And also the flute has a very unique position. It's always very close to Krishna's lips. So they feel that the flute's their opposition. Now, as soon as the sound of Krishna's flute entered into Radharani's ears, she became overwhelmed with a desire to be with him, to meet with him. And unable to control herself, she jumped up and ran out of the kunja to meet Krishna. She ran out of that forest. And it all happened so fast that her girlfriends were not able to put the final touch, the finishing touch of the kajal to her eyes. Anyway, as soon as she met up with Krishna, he happily had her sit on a very beautiful seat of flowers arranged by, of course, Vrindadevi, who facilitates all these pastimes, every detail actually. But when Krishna looked at Radha, he noticed that she was very nicely dressed and very nicely decorated, but it's described, he saw that her eyes were devoid of any kajal. So when he inquired from the Sakis, what's the reason for this? They just said, well, your flute's the culprit, Krishna, because it dragged her away and we couldn't finish. So at that point, Krishna smiled, and taking advantage of the opportunity, he placed his finger on a large stone which was within arm's reach. He rubbed that stone slightly with his index finger, and he produced the most beautiful dark kajal that the gopis had ever seen. I mean, this was just a stone there. Of course, nothing's just or ordinary in Vrindavan, but, this stone produced that black ointment, that black kajal, and the most beautiful kajal that gopis had ever seen. And then with great affection, he personally applied that kajal on the eyes of his dearmost Radharani. And Bhakti Ratnakara says it so beautifully. Rashara Avesha Krishna Anjana Laya Dilena Radi Kanetri Maha Harsha Hoya. Quote, Krishna, being absorbed in transcendental mellows, rasa, applied Anjana Kajal to Sri Radhika's eyes with the greatest of pleasure. Unquote. So in Sanskrit, the word for kajal is Anjana. So from that day forward, where Krishna took that kajal, that Anjana, from that rock became famous as Anjana Shila. Shila means like a stone. Like we have Govardhan Shilas and we have Shalagram Shilas. So here's an Anjana Shila, a Shila of kajal. And therefore the forest there, the forest of which we're describing these pastimes today, Anjana-Vana, Vana means forest, the forest of Kajal. Induleka's village, because that's where her home is, the village, it became famous as Anjanoka. Anjanoka. Isn't that wonderful? To hear these histories. This is real history. So after applying the Kajal, Krishna, he held a mirror in front of Radharani so that she could see her face, her eyes with the kajal. And the acharyas say that while Radharani enjoyed seeing her eyes that had been anointed with kajal by Krishna, that's what made it special. While she enjoyed looking at that, Krishna enjoyed seeing Radharani's beautiful face reflected in the mirror. Now you may have seen, I've seen a number of occasions, paintings or pictures of this particular pastime, where they ended this pastime. And Radharani's looking at her eyes, appreciating Krishna's service. Krishna's a little bit away and he's looking in the mirror at Radharani's reflection. So sweet. Sweet, sweet, sweet. Madhur, madhur, madhur bhaje. So at that place where Krishna decorated Sri Radha with the kajal, there's a throne. There's still a throne there. We took our Parikrama party there one time. And there's also, in that little region area, a beautiful temple, small temple with deities of guests. Shri Radha Anjana Bihari. Bihari means the enjoyer of Radha, bedecked with the kajal. Sri Radha Anjana Bihari. Exquisitely beautiful deities, especially Radha's eyes. And nowadays it's within the actual village of Anjanoka. And please go there. Please go there. And when you're there on your Parikrama, you can also come with us. Go take darshan of Radha Anjana Bihari. And while there, the stone's very prominent. It's right there in the courtyard. Go over there. There's other boulders there, but if you rub your hands there, nothing happens. But go to that particular stone, that boulder, and rub your finger just like this. And mystically, there's this black substance on your, very much exactly like Kajal actually. That's the mystery. Run your finger on the Anjana Shila and put that transcendental Kajal on your eyes. Boys and girls, it doesn't matter. Because who knows, maybe with that mystic Kajal, you'll see Radha and Krishna just before your eyes. Maybe. Because it's something very transcendental. Premanjani Chariti Bhakti Valochanena. When the eyes are covered with the salve of love of God, one can see Krishna as he is. So I'm sure the Kajal will help. Hare Krishna. Now, we'll move on to another pastime. In a village in nearby Vrindavan. In nearby Vrindavan. In the forest of Vrindavan, there was a place where, there is a place where Krishna liked to wrestle with his friends. We often hear the cowherd boys are wrestling. So one day, Radharani and Krishna were visiting that particular place, that particular setting, and they were sitting and they were enjoying each other's association, very near to that wrestling arena. When Radharani said, "My dear Krishna, what is that large square drawn in the sand over there?" And Krishna smiled and he answered very proudly. He said, "My dear Radharani, that is a wrestling arena where me and my cowherd friends dress as wrestlers and engage each other in hand-to-hand combat." So Radharani was intrigued. And raising her eyebrows, she asked, "Krishna, do you sometimes win?" Krishna was surprised by her question, maybe a little bit hurt. So he replied, "Devi, no one knows how to wrestle like I do. I always win, except for the times I pretend to lose to your brother. He's quite a poor sport." A poor loser. So Radharani smiled, and she very calmly replied, "Krishna, my brother Sri Ram tells me just the opposite. He says that he always wins when you wrestle together, and that you never take it very well." So Krishna he shot back, "Of course he would say that. Of course he would say that." So just then Lalita, she took a step forward and she said, "Shyam, why don't you show us your wrestler's dress and the moves you use to defeat your opponents?" So shaking his head, Krishna replied, "That's impossible. Wrestlers dress only for a live match. We don't model, even if it's for royalty." Even if it's for royalty. So Lalita said, "What if someone were to challenge you to a match? Would you accept?" "Saki," Krishna boasted, "I'm the son of a king. How can I refuse a challenge to fight?" Then Lalita said, "Then you should accept my challenge, Krishna. I challenge you to fight with my friend, Radha. She's the goddess of victory, Jaya Sri, and we gopis shall join in the fight as well." That's so nicely described. Hearing Lalita's words made Krishna nearly faint in ecstasy. He thought, he pinched himself. Is this a dream? No, I'm awake. My pious life spent protecting cows has now yielded this sweet request from the gopis to wrestle with them. It's incredible. But he paused and he finally said, "But how can I, a prince, wrestle with weak, untrained women, especially a very beautiful, delicate princess like Sri Radha?" No, it would not be right. But then Vishaka spoke up. "But how can you, O noble one, refuse a challenge If the people of Braja hear of it, your father will hide his head in shame. So nodding his head, Krishna replied, I see. King Cupid, the enemy of pure brahmacharis, like myself, has sent you ladies to test me. So be it, then. So be it. Never let it be said that the son of Nanda ran away from a challenge. Then while he was walking around Radha, who, by the way, had covered her smiling face. Krishna said to her, Radha, get ready to wrestle. So giggling and chatting, the gopis, they ushered Radha into a nearby grove, where she and those gopis, they changed clothes, into wrestling clothes. At the same time, Krishna selected his most colorful wrestling cloth from a forest storehouse. What's a forest storehouse? Well, we mentioned that many months ago. One of Vrindadevi's services in facilitating this pastime, so she has different storehouses in different parts of Vrindavan's forest with particular items that can be utilized in the pastimes that take place in those particular places. Each forest, there's a different mood, there's a different pastime, there's different devotees. So she sets up these storehouses. Whatever they need for the pastime, just open the door and go in and take it. Like, something like Kalpavriksha trees. You can ask a Kalpavriksha tree for for an orange, for an apple, for a spoon, for a plate, for whatever. So wonderful, Vrindavan. So Krishna, he took his colorful wrestling cloth from a nearby forest storehouse. And then shortly thereafter, the gopis emerged from the grove they were in, just as Krishna walked out of the storehouse. And when Krishna saw Radharani and the gopis, he was amazed at their wrestling attire and their hair, which is described, was tied neatly in top knots above their heads. And Krishna was dressed in a golden cloth, knotted in the front and the back, and his legs were exposed below the knee, and he wore a bright orange belt around his waist. And his only ornaments were his blue wristbands. Now the gopis, they had tied their lower cloths in the manner of Kshatriyas, and they also wore bright cloth belts. So to begin the wrestling match, Krishna invited the gopis into the wrestling arena. It gets really blissful now. And he smeared ghee on the ground in worship of the earth. Then he positioned the girls on one side while he stood on the other side. And he said, give a little speech. My dear girls, before we begin, let me describe the rules that our wrestling school follows. The rules of our wrestling school. We cowherd boys concentrate on moves that cause great pain to our opponents. Hanuman is our hero, and so we follow the Hanumanti school. It's described, Hanumanti school. Delineated, he said, in the Malapurana. In killing demons, Krishna goes on, I have been known to use knee strikes to the chest and punches to the head, along with hair-pulling girls and strangleholds. So hearing this, the gopis' eyes got very wide. And it's described that mild-mannered Chitradevi leaned over to Lalita Saki and she whispered, what kind of game have you gotten us into? What kind of game have you gotten us into, Lalita? So Krishna continued, my wrestling style, he said, is similar to that used by the Vanara king Bali in his defeat of Ravana. So at this point, Tunga Vidya, she whispered to the girls, now he's comparing us to Ravana. Oh dear. Now he's comparing us to Ravana. Oh dear. So Krishna continued. However, because you are all of the weaker sex, we will not engage in the combat wrestling I do with my friends, which I've described. Instead, we will have pastime wrestling, which you can find in the Malakarita. The gopis looking like, what? Pastime wrestling? Krishna said, yes, which is recommended for play and amusement. So the gopis, they sighed, they made a sigh of relief, and then, okay, they nodded in agreement. And then Krishna joined his palms, and he directed the gopis to offer prayers to the patron deity of his wrestling school, Sri Hanuman. And he commanded, you being women, it's only fair that you fight me all at once, rather than one at a time. And he kind of looked to the side and smiled. So then he declared, enough talk. Let the fight begin. So Krishna stepped into the wrestling arena. He slapped his palms, reached down to rub some earth beneath his hands, bent his knees, and he yelled, Jai Hanuman, Jai Hanuman, Jai Hanuman, Jai Hanuman. Then, this Krishna's intensity, you could say, actually startled the gopis. So each girl tried to push another girl forward. This is going on for some time. You go, you go. And finally Radha was in front with Lalita and Vishaka on her sides. And all the other girls were now behind them. So this, how would you say, this army of gopis, this gopi army, slowly started advancing from their side of the arena towards Krishna. And as the combat began, Krishna wrestled with all the gopis at once, when suddenly he slipped out of their grasp and he confronted Srimati Radharani alone, right in the center of the arena. And at that point, the other gopis, they encircled the divine couple, encouraging Radha with cheers of, victory, 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 victory to you, Sri Radha. Get him. Get him down on the ground. And as the wrestling match continued, Radharani had almost pinned Krishna's shoulders to the ground. I remember in high school, I used to wrestle. And, the whole point was to win the match, your opponent, you had to, on his back. And if you could pin both shoulders, it wasn't easy, to the ground, you won the match. So Radharani had almost pinned Krishna's shoulders to the ground, which, caused the gopis to cheer even louder. But then Krishna escaped. And suddenly, without warning, he reappeared and caught each and every gopi simultaneously from behind. He expanded himself, just like we heard the other day when he was with the cowherd boys taking prasadam in the forest. He would expand himself, so each cowherd boy was thinking, Krishna's just taking prasadam with me. He often does that. So he grabbed each of the gopis behind, but they didn't particularly like it in this instance because he wrestled them to the ground. And they all called out, foul play, that's not fair, you can't come from behind. And as the match continued, Krishna's, how's it described, most formidable foe continuously proved to be Sri Radha. It's like that. And even after Krishna successfully had subdued, even gopis like Indulekha, Brangadevi, it's said that Radharani stayed in top form, repeatedly, slipping away from Krishna's grasp, and then attacking him, from another angle with some new wrestling hold he had a hard time getting out of. So finally, fatigued but blissful, all the gopis surrounded the entire wrestling arena to watch the divine couple face off in a final fight to the finish. And as the gopis were chanting, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, in unison, Krishna, finally exhausted and conquered by Radha's wrestling skills and her love, as a sign of submission, he tapped her 3 times. You know, in wrestling, nowadays they have that UFC fighting. If you're down and someone's got you in a hole that's painful, you tap out. So Krishna, he tapped out. He said, I give up. So then the acharyas say Krishna barely managed to stand up. But when he did, he very proudly broadcasted Radha's name far and wide, saying, Jai Shri is the goddess of victory. Jai Shri is the goddess of victory. Jai Shri is the goddess of victory. And his proclamation reverberated throughout Sri Vrindavan Dham, causing the inhabitants, including even animals and birds and bees and trees, to smile in great happiness and satisfaction that Radharani, the queen of Vrindavan, had conquered Krishna with her skills and with her mahabhav, with her love. So, Raghunath Das Goswami has wonderfully summed up this transcendental pastime in his Brajavilashtava, text 93. He says, Mali Kritya Nija Shaki, Priyatama Garvena Sambhavita. It goes on, it's quite a long Sanskrit verse, but he says, I sing the glory of Bandira, the Bandiravan, where charming Sri Radha, being eager to wrestle with Krishna, dressed herself and her sakis in wrestling costumes for the pleasure of her beloved Madana. She then cheerfully wrestled he who was also Bakari, the enemy of Bakashura, who was also dressed in wrestler's attire, unquote. Hare Krishna. So today, I would like to finish with a beautiful verse about the Kajal pastime in Anjanoka, the village, Anjanoka, in the village of Indulekasaki. It's composed by my scholarly friend, Hari Parshad Prabhu, from the GBC Shastra Committee. He lives in Mumbai. The other day, a devotee politely questioned me on the phone, Maharaj, you're often quoting new shlokas respectfully written by Hari Prasad Prabhu, but they're nice, but wouldn't it be more appropriate to quote, ancient scriptures, shlokas from ancient scriptures or from our acharyas? So I said, yes, that's certainly appropriate, but I replied also, I said that there was once a devotee named Jayadev, not our Jayadev Goswami. This Jayadev, he lived in the year 1300 AD. And he wrote a book called Chandraloka, which essentially is it's a manual on Sanskrit poetry. But when he started writing Chandraloka, many people objected. They said, quote, everything else has already been written by previous acharyas. Why do you write a new manual? Is it to prove them all wrong? Everything has already been written by our previous acharyas. Why write a new manual? Is it to prove them all wrong? So it's a known fact here in India that every new generation that writes their realizations based on Shastra, they often face doubt from the older generations. What is the need for this? So understanding this at that particular point in history, Jayadev wrote in the beginning of his Chandraloka book, he wrote, Nashan kaniyam etesham matam etana doshute kintu chakshu mrigadshinam Kajal in eva bhushyate. Quote, readers should kindly not doubt that the opinions of previous great acharyas of poetry will be shown as inferior by this new creation of mine. In fact, their opinions will be highlighted and glorified even more, just as beautiful doe-eyed ladies appear even more beautiful when a useless black substance named Anjana is applied to their eyes. That's so beautiful, so clear. That's Chandraloka, first chapter, verse number 5. The idea is that the writings of the previous acharyas are like the eyes of beautiful ladies. And any present-day writer's realizations may be as useless as dark Anjana Kajal. But when this dark Kajal, these writings, are applied on the beautiful eyes of the writings of the previous acharyas, their writings become even more beautiful. Hare Krishna. So we thank Hariparsha Prabhu for his beautiful shlokas. They bring out the beauty of the previous acharyas' writings, like Kajal on the eyes. Hare Krishna. So I'd like to finish with his a verse he wrote for this class. It only took him 20 minutes. I asked him, because I knew about this Jayadev, and I wanted him to write something, and then I could explain why I'm having him contribute in this way on a regular basis. So this is his verse on this pastime of Krishna's decorating Radha's eyes with Kajal. Krishnat vam radhika netre sadaivasti tata puna Krishna yachati krishnat vam kim ascharyam ata param. He wrote, Krishna tvam, Krishna-ness, the quality of the presence of Krishna, is eternally existing in the eye of Sri Radhika. Yet Krishna himself is again bestowing Krishna-tvam, Krishna-ness, blackness, into that eye. What could be a greater surprise than this? Krishna-tvam, Krishna-ness, the quality of the presence of Krishna, is eternally existing in the eye of Sri Radhika. Yet Krishna himself is again bestowing Krishna-tvam, Krishna-ness, blackness, into it. What could be a greater surprise than this? Hare Krishna. Wow. Prabhus, thank you once again for your mercy and allowing me to share these precious jewels of Radha and Krishna's pastimes and Krishna Balaram's pastimes and all their devotees and all the inhabitants of that transcendental abode, the animals, the birds, the bees, the trees of Vrindavan, with all of you. It's actually become my favorite service. Well, thank you. And I'll take your leave here. I'll go back to my library in the back there and do some more research. And yes, I'll see you in a few days. Hare Krishna. Shishi Gaur Nitai ki, Shishi Krishna Balaram ki, Shishi Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavan Eshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Astasakis of Vrindavan ki, Induleka ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Anjana-Van ki, back home, back to Godhead ki, Go Premanandi, Jaya Sri Radhe, Sham, Harivol, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki. Hare Krishna.